Okay, so we're going to talk about some really important issues today having to do still with inequality in society. Still, social stratification is our major theme. But today we are going to move into not just considering socioeconomic status, not just considering differences, or here's a good college level word for you, disparities. Disparities means differences between one type of poverty to the next, or comparing this high-income country to this low-income country's rate of human development within it. So those have been very, very important measurements to gauge disparities in wealth and poverty throughout the world. And we know that socioeconomic status involves what three achieved statuses? Occupation, education, and income. All three of those together intertwined. So those are vital issues in the way that we measure social inequality in the United States. But there are other factors that are not based on achieved statuses, but are based on ascribed statuses that also affect our ability to have social mobility, which was part of your group work the other day, or part of the discussion board question if you're an online student. So social mobility is the ability to move up or down within your system of social stratification. So if you're born as a working class kid, social mobility, our idea is that you can move up and be a middle class adult or something, and that you have the ability to do that. That ability to move up in the social stratification system is really what the American dream is based on. So we have the, here's my air quotes, freedom to move up or down in that system. We don't like to think of the downward way, right? We don't want to think about climbing down the social ladder. The American dream is about being able to get up it, right? Okay, so some of you have asked some really deep questions about achieved status compared to ascribed status when we were talking about the American dream. And so today's lecture is really about how your ascribed status can have some interplay with whether you are actually able to achieve the American dream. So on that chart that we looked at in our group work in class on Monday, on page 44 and 45 of the Hidden Rules Among Classes handout, one of the indices, one of the measuring concepts about poverty, middle class, and wealth, one thing that was on the left-hand side was family structure. Some of you focused on family structure and the way in poverty we look to the matriarch or the mother or the maternal figure as the head of a household. And in middle class family structure is you look at the patriarch or the father figure as the head of the household. And in wealth, you can choose between the mother's side or the father's side, and usually the one with the most authority in the microscale household is the side where the wealth is coming from. So if mama's daddy is the keeper of the wealth, then mama's side of the family is the one that's the most important to you. Or if the opposite line of the family is the keeper of the wealth, then that's the line of the family that you defer to. It's not about liking mama's daddy better than papa's daddy. It's about mama's daddy's got the bank book. And so we will follow the guidelines of that person, even if papa's daddy is the funnest guy around, or most fun, whatever the proper word is there. And, you really like him. It's not about liking. It's about who's the most socially advantageous for you to align your life decisions with. Okay, so let's look at these certain ascribed statuses today. All of this is focused on social inequality, and we're going to look at the differences between what we call dominant groups dominant groups versus subordinate groups. Dominant groups versus subordinate groups. We're going to learn how to identify what a dominant group is or who makes up the dominant group in a society. And we're going to learn how to identify, conversely, who makes up a subordinate group in a society. And these things are based on, typically based on social definitions, cultural definitions based on ascribed status, not achieved status. Okay? So these different types of statuses are very, very important for determining whether you are in the dominant group or a subordinate group. Okay, so let's see. These topics that we're going to discuss right now come from chapters 9 and 10. Chapter 9 focuses on two very commonly used terms, race and ethnicity. Race and ethnicity. Those are not new words to your ears, are they? No, so you've heard these words before. They are not fancy, fancy spelling, sociology words or something. Race and ethnicity. We use these all the time, and when I hear people in public or people on TV or something using these words, sometimes I have this little mental note. Did they use this word properly as its actual sociological definition, or did they use this word incorrectly? Because sometimes people will mix up the meanings of these or use these words interchangeably, and they are not interchangeable. They have distinct definitions. So, the first thing that you need to know about race is that race does not exist. Racial categories do not exist scientifically. That means you cannot go into an anatomy lab and find an anatomical, is that how you say that word? Anatomical differences from one person who is labeled as this race to another person who is labeled as this race. So race is a socially or culturally defined, bless you, group of people.
Well, what about the sense that certain races coming from the different diseases?
Okay, yeah, good question. And that is true. There are certain diseases, for instance, with African Americans or people of African descent have an issue with sickle cell anemia, for instance. And so anyone with any shared bloodline from African descent can have a propensity for sickle cell anemia. These things that's a great question, and I love to talk about it, but these things are issues that you can really go deeply into in a biological anthropology class, because it has to do with evolutionary history. All of the secondary characteristics that are used to develop a socially or culturally defined set of characteristics to identify racial groups, all of those secondary characteristics have occurred in human beings because of evolutionary processes. And is that clear?
So it depends on their environment and how they grew up, not necessarily because of the race itself. Let's say it's
I'm going to say it does have to do with environment, but the way you worded that question sounded kind of micro scale to me, and evolutionary history and evolutionary processes happen. If there is a mumbo jumbo macro scale, then it happens on a mumbo jumbo macro scale, because it takes millennia for different traits to take over an entire population of people. So for instance, I don't want to talk about this too long, but it's fun to talk about this. So for instance, in equatorial Africa, and y'all need to take my cultural geography class, we get to talk about this more, okay? Shameless self-promotion there. But anyway, take my cultural geography class and we'll be able to talk about this in a whole chapter. But anyway, so in equatorial Africa, so y'all know what the equator is, right? Okay, and so that's the equator is the place on the earth where the sun's rays hit the most directly of any other place. It's not always directly over there because the earth kind of does this on its axis while it's going around. So the sun kind of has a little bit of an angle, but the most direct angle of any place on this earth where the sun's rays hit is in equatorial Africa. Up around northern Europe, up around northern Canada, and that kind of place in the Arctic Circle or the Antarctic Circle. That's where the sun's rays hit at the greatest angle, the most significant angle. So if this is the, y'all have got me talking about this, I don't need to be talking about this. Anyway, so if the sun is here, for instance, here's the sun, see how pretty that is? And here's the equator, it's hitting directly, but up here it hits like this and it has more of a likelihood to pop off. Yes, to reflect the radiant energy of the sun away from the Earth's surface. So people, human beings, guess who lives here? Human beings. And guess who lives here? Human beings. But these people are dark and these people are stark white, and it has to do with this over the millennia. So humans who concentrated living here on the equator for the majority of their geological history, and humans who evolved here, human beings need vitamin D from the sun in order to process calcium in our system that our bones are built from and that keep us healthy. And we get vitamin D from the melanin in our skin, converting the rays of the sun to vitamin D. And people who are here get direct hits from the sun. Their melanin is more concentrated and protects them from vitamin D overdose. And people here are more affected by the sun because they're paler, and so it takes far less sunlight for them to get enough vitamin D that they need in order to survive generations after generations, millennia after millennia. And so you got white folks, you got black folks. Guess what they are? Humans. And so all around the world, race, wherever you find distinctions of race, it is socially defined as a category of people. There is no biological foundation for it, because here's your biological foundation. Homo sapien sapien, Homo sapien sapien. It just, okay. And in the same way, the sickle cell anemia thing is linked to this because mosquitoes survive here, mosquitoes don't survive here, mosquitoes spread malaria. You are much less likely to be affected by malaria if you have sickle cells in your bloodstream. So it's a saving thing as far as malaria goes. Anyway, fascinating. We can't talk about it anymore. This is a sociology class. But anyway, good question. Do what? Okay. So, race is culturally defined. Now, the way we define it typically has to do with these things that I called secondary characteristics. Secondary characteristics are the skin color thing that we just figured out how and why it happens. So, typically in countries around the world where racial categories are defined, we use characteristics like skin color or like hair texture or like eye shape or nose shape, those kinds of things to classify this racial group compared to this racial group. It's still Homo sapiens sapiens, humans and humans, but according to the norms or the social facts in those places, those differences in this human and this human are important enough to be factored into the social stratification. Does that make sense? So our ascribed status, if you go back to chapter 4, we had a list of ascribed statuses. Race was one of them. Sex was another. Your age was another. So have you heard of words like racism, sexism, ageism? These isms are socially defined ways of categorizing people as inferior or superior compared to these really silly, non-scientifically based differences in the population. And race is one of those things. Okay? So race is socially defined, not anatomical. It's not anatomical. There are some things that you will find in anatomy class. Yes, the female skeleton has some different characteristics than the male skeleton. Our pelvic bone in particular is one of those things. Yes, there's in general a different size of the cranium between a man and between a woman. These are minor characteristics, just like skin tone differences are minor characteristics. Hair texture differences are minor characteristics. We are human beings. Okay? And so, race is defined differently from one place to the next. Have y'all ever seen the movie Hotel Rwanda?
Yes.
It's an old movie. I mean,
My brother watched it.
yeah, sometimes there's one history class I think that you can watch that movie for like an extra credit project or something because it's a true story. So if you haven't seen it, it is a true story about events that happened during a civil war in a country called Rwanda in Africa. Okay, the majority of the population in Africa, in this country of Africa, in Rwanda, to a U.S. population, we would say they are black. Black as a racial category. Not African American. They live in Africa. They're not American. Okay? So worldwide, black is a racial category term that is not an offensive social word. Okay? In the United States, the appropriate term to use for people of black African descent is African American. I had a student who was of African descent years ago. She was from London, England, and she had, I can't do her accent, but she had, a British accent, and we were talking about this topic in class, and she raised her hand and shared with the class that she gets approached all the time, and about her accent, since it's a British, I can't do it, but it's a British accent, and so people would say, well, where are you from? And she said that typically people would say, I didn't know there were African Americans in England, and she would say, well, there aren't. We're British.
Yeah.
And so just the name is also a social construct. What is appropriate here or follows our norms here, you don't have those same norms in other places. It's false to assume you have those same norms in other places. And so, there's going to be different behaviors that correspond. Okay? So yeah, race is not an anatomical characteristic. It is a socially defined characteristic. Back to the movie Hotel Rwanda. It was a race war. I advise you to watch this movie. It wasn't easy for me to watch. I'm a crybaby, as y'all probably know, but it wasn't easy for me to watch because this civil war was violent. It killed millions of people, and it was over race. It was over a made-up issue in the minds of human beings. And it was from the, would you look up the names? Look up, I think it's the Hutus. Yeah, I think it's the Hutus is the name of one racial group, and it was like a tribal kind of organization, which again, you can learn about that organization in anthropology class. But it's like a political organization. But one of them was called the Hutus, the other one was the Tutsis, I think, or the Watutsis.
Yeah,
And basically, they were different because of racial characteristics. I think one was tall and slender-ish, so physical characteristics, tall and slender, and lighter skin, maybe? There was something about their nose shape, you're right. So yeah, there was like a list of physical characteristics. Skin tone, body type, nose shape, or something like this. And then the other one had a different body type, nose shape, and skin tone. But to an American audience, when we look at these people, we wouldn't see probably the differences that they saw because in their socialization process, they learned these differences. They learned that these differences are important. They learned that these differences are real. They learned that these differences matter. Just like in our socialization process, unfortunately, many of us learn that these differences are real, they matter, and they are significant and should be considered significant in our lives. So race is a real thing, but it's made up everywhere you go. It's made up based on different things. How many of y'all, It's always made up from physical characteristics. And here's a couple of physical characteristics I kind of want to write like a dystopian movie about it or something. But how many of y'all have like earlobes that connect to your cheek? Anybody? A couple of people? I don't. I have like an earlobe that's not attached. But like probably half of us have like an earlobe that's not attached, and half of us have like an earlobe that's attached. There's a physical characteristic that could be used. See, you're giggling. I'm glad you're giggling, because isn't that silly to have your earlobe attached or not attached, and that's going to put you in a racial category? That's how silly the skin color thing is. Except we grew up with thinking that the skin color thing is an issue. And for instance, my little toes are short and stubby. They look like little Vienna sausages. My husband's toes, that man I think can play the bass bassoon with his toes. They're like, and he's got like the two little toes beside his big toes are like longer than his. And so lots of people are like that, right? Lots of people have little short hobbit-looking feet like mine, and a lot of people have like, I don't know what kind of feet his are, but he's got these long. What about that physical characteristic? Hobbit people versus, I don't know.
I see pictures online where they show people feet and draw like lines.
Yeah, exactly. You can see like these. Yeah, so there's a physical characteristic that a lot of people in the population have their two toes beside their big toe as longer, and a lot of us have them shorter. Well, there's a physical characteristic that we could group each other. All you short toe over here and long toe over here. And I'm glad you're laughing again, because this is a stupid physical characteristic that could be used to categorize people. Just like hair texture or eye shape or nose shape or any of these other things. They are important to us only because we learn them in our socialization process. But because we learn them in our socialization process. Yeah, or web-toed or something, yes, which happens all the time. So anyway, race is simply a social construction. It's different from one place to the next because every culture has different characteristics that they look at to determine what racial category. Race is a real thing only because we set social rules or we establish social norms surrounding different racial categories. It's going to play significantly into the difference between the dominant and a subordinate group when we get to that definition of those two things. Let me erase my good artwork over here. Okay, so questions. Ethnicity is not the same thing as race. Ethnicity is a characteristic or a category. I need a better marker than this. Ethnicity is defined by a group's cultural characteristics, cultural habits, or cultural characteristics. It is not about physical traits like race is. It's about cultural habits and behaviors. So, for instance, foods. Can the foods that you prefer to eat, because in your socialization process you learned about those foods, can those foods be specific to your cultural group? Such as, I see lots of heads saying yes, so I'm going to ask you, such as what?
My husband is Arabic and they don't eat pork.
There we go. Okay, so an Arabic person might not, if they are Muslim also, if they are Arabic and Muslim, there is a prohibition against pork. Perfect. In Islam there is, and also in Judaism, there's a prohibition against pork. In Arabic, or excuse me, in Islam, I think there's also a prohibition. We won't mind this one because we don't eat this ourselves anyway, as estadounidenses we don't. But dog also, they can't eat, according to like law, religious law. So yes, so our foods can be an indication of cultural habits. Also in Judaism, there's something called kosher, which is a food preparation habit. You have to keep dairy away from meat and blood products. So there's all kinds of habits that govern like what foods that you can eat. And since we're talking about religion, can holidays
Yes.
have something to do with your cultural habits or your characteristics of your group? Yeah, and it's not just holidays, it can be the holy day of the week. So in Christianity,
Sabbath.
Sunday. Judaism, the Sabbath is what day?
It's Friday. No, Friday's the Sabbath.
It's Saturday. Yeah, Logan got it. And then in Islam, what is the holy day? Friday. Friday is the holy day. So it's not just holidays like Eid or Christmas. It's lots of, it's just in your weekly calendar. How might you conceive the world or even conceive time based on your ethnicity? What about clothing? Can you see someone dressed the way that they are and know whether they are from here or not, right? According to different clothing patterns. Languages itself. Language is a big marker of ethnicity. You can use language to identify multiple ethnic groups within the United States. And those ethnic groups I'm talking about are Northerner versus Southerner. Do Southerners talk different than those Yankees do? And let me tell you, they do, because I got lots of Yankees in my family. My mother was a Yankee from Rhode Island. And every time I go there, I want to listen to them talk, and they're like, will you talk? You talk so funny to them, right?
I lived in Connecticut for a
Yeah,
while.
and so that is a marker of my ethnicity as a Southerner or their ethnicity as a Northerner. And let me just tell you also that there's a lot of food differences from the North to the South, too. I don't want to get off on another tangent, but there was a show that I'm sure all of you DVR'd called Hillbilly Hand Fishing. Have y'all ever seen that show before? I'm sure it's the first one on your DVR waiting for you to watch it. But anyway, it was on a couple years ago, and there was, y'all know what noodling is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Catfish, they stick in it.
You catch catfish that are like
And
in a hole, in some kind of crevice or something right underneath the surface of the water. You stick your arm down in there and actually let the catfish bite you, and you pull the catfish out. Yeah, I'm with you, Marcia. No. But anyway, this is apparently a wonderful thing that people love to do, and there was a show, this show about it, and they had a group of people from Georgia and I think a group of people from New York or something like that, competing. And at the end of their week learning how to do this, they were cooking for each other. And so how did the Georgia folks cook their catfish, do y'all suppose? Yeah, yes, cornmeal and hush puppies, and everything was fried. And if I remember, let me see. And so the cameraman went from they're cooking your supper, and he went over to the Northerners and said, they're cooking up your catfish, they're giving you fried catfish and fried hush puppies, and told them about the menu. And the Yankees were like, I say Yankee in a loving way. My mother was a Yankee, okay? But those Yankees were like, what? They're frying this? They're ruining that fish, and no wonder everybody's got heart disease or something, right? All of their prejudices, stereotypes, based on their misconception of the ethnicity, right? And the Yankees cooked their fish. They filleted it. I think they broiled it with lemon on it or something.
Yeah.
And when the camera people told the Southerners that's how the Yankees are fixing your food, they were like, what? Those Yankees have no idea what good food is, or they're ruining the catfish or something, right? This automatic, again, reaction to perceived differences or reaction to flawed ways of thinking, that's the kind of prejudice that we can have because in our socialization process, we learn one way, and that's the right way, isn't it? But they learn another way, and that's the right way to them. And so these two things become very real. They're based on silly things when you zoom out and look. But these things are very real to us, and we can develop significant social problems on the macro scale when the norms and the social facts use stereotypes, prejudices, ethnocentrism to categorize people as superior or inferior to each other based on these socially made up things. These are socially made up things. Questions? So chapter 9 is about the race and ethnicity. We're not finished talking about chapter 9, but I'm going to talk about 2 issues. What time is it? Oh yeah, okay, I have time to talk about the 2 issues from chapter 10 that also go into this dominant and subordinate group discussion. So let me do that, and then on Monday of next week, what we will do is continue to talk about chapter 9 and chapter 10 simultaneously, because they're about the same thing. They're about prejudice, discrimination, institutional discrimination, which is a macro level type of bias that can exist in the social facts of a nation, in the macro level norms of a nation. So we'll talk about all of the topics from chapter 9 and chapter 10 together. Got it?
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty, so the 2 topics that are in chapter 10, but again, people mistakenly use these words interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable. The 2 words are sex and gender.
Oh my God. I think about this all the time.
Oh, good. Well, today is your class day if you consider these kinds of things all the time. Okay, so let's get a correct idea of what we in social science mean when we say these 2 words. Just like I want to make it clear, race and ethnicity are not the same thing, right? We have to make sure we mean what we say when we use race and when we use ethnicity. We also need to get the terms sex and gender straight. And let me just tell you, it's so frustrating for me to see how often these words are misused. Like in society in general, like if you're filling out a form, it'll say gender, male, female, other, or something. No, that's your sex, right? You know, so it's frustrating a little bit to see how often these 2 words are used interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable. Your sex is your anatomical condition. Anatomical condition of being male or female or other. Yes. Male, female, or other. And yes, I heard somebody say other. Yes, other. There are 3, let me say this slowly. There are 3 naturally occurring. What's naturally occurring mean? Like in nature, no alterations necessary. There are 3 naturally occurring sex categories in all of nature, not just Homo sapiens sapiens, but in all of nature. There's male, there's female, and the other has a specific vocabulary word that goes with it. It is called intersex. Intersex. There are a wide variety of ways an individual can be intersex. If you have a combination of parts, whether they are primary physical characteristics like genitalia or secondary characteristics such as breasts or mammary glands, if you have a combination of female and male primary or secondary physical characteristics that are usually used to identify female or identify male, then you're considered intersex. For instance, I have a male relative, who, when he hit puberty, began to develop breasts. Intersex. No, it's a naturally occurring thing. It happens all the time. It's odd to our ears to hear this because in our social facts, in the norms that we learn in our socialization process, we cover this up. The doctor doesn't know to say, it's a boy, it's a girl, the boy, we know it's a boy, it's a girl. We don't learn in our socialization process, in our schooling, we don't typically learn that other is a naturally occurring sex category called intersex. Naturally occurring. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that. You're going to be so annoyed that I say naturally occurring, because it does. It occurs all throughout nature. Some plants, for instance, by design are bisexual. They have like a lily flower. Do y'all remember studying this in like 8th grade science or something? A lily flower has ovaries or ovum or something. I can't remember what they're called. Ovum, I think, which is a female plant part, and it has a stamen, which is a male plant part, and pollen is a male plant part, like semen is a male animal part, and an ovum or an egg is a female animal part. Okay, so for instance, if and when little boys are born, for instance, the scrotum sac where their testicles will be eventually is kind of like sucked up, and like inside their testicles have to what we call descend. And so that's a normal thing to see. Okay, this is a little boy, but you don't see the testicles yet because they have not. How long does it take for them to come? Anybody know? It's a little while for the testicles to descend, but sometimes they never do. And so you won't know that until later, right? And so there's a lot of different ways to be intersex, where something that is expected to be there isn't there, or something that's not expected to be there is there simultaneously. Yes, ma'am?
What if that's the case as a woman? Like she genders like a woman, but she produces testosterone levels?
Well, this is a fascinating topic too. So the sex hormones, all of us, males and females, all have the same sex hormones. So it is perfectly normal for females to have testosterone, just like males have estrogen in their system.
But isn't it a case where, even though we both have the same, it's the amount?
Yes. So there is an expected hormone cocktail, for lack of a better word, that a female will have, and there is an expected hormone combination that with like the amounts like you're talking about. And both males and females have a lunar cycle where their hormone levels adjust.
Some females have more testosterone.
It's based on the body itself.
Just what?
So it just really doesn't matter because it's all individual-wise. It's not really.
Yeah, I mean the expected categories for people to fit into are male and female, and because there's a list of primary and secondary characteristics that we can make that we say, okay, this goes with female and this goes with male. But when there is a combination of that in the same organism, it's called intersex. Okay, and the brain is the largest sex organ in the body. The brain is. So that complicates things. We're complicated. Okay, any other questions? Naturally occurring, 3 naturally occurring sex categories. Gender, on the other hand, this is socially or culturally defined sets of behaviors associated with 2 different words. Not male or female, those are sex words. Here are your gender words. Associated with what we call masculinity, if I can spell it correctly, masculinity, and I'm going to make kind of like a little line and put the other one over here. Femininity. Spell that right? Okay, so femininity is over here, masculinity is over here. These are gender words. Male, female, intersex are sex words. Okay? That's why when I see some form that somebody needs to fill out and it has a place in there where you can fill in your gender and it gives you male, female, other, no. No, that's not your gender, right? So masculinity versus femininity, and I made this kind of like line segment in between these. Why? What? It's a spectrum. And if you remember your geometry class, yes, I want to talk about math and sociology for a second. How many points exist on any given line or line segment? Infinite. That's correct. You're remembering your geometry. So I am using this line segment intentionally, because you can't say, oh, there's 100 stopping points between this and that, so there's 100 genders in the, nope, can't do it. There's an infinite number. Does every single culture have the same gender categories within it? No, because our norms are different everywhere. So if I ask you, let me just ask you to give me 3 or 4 adjectives that you would say go with this farthest endpoint for masculinity that you can possibly think of. Strong. Competitive.
Great.
Well, yeah, manly. Manly is another gender description. But that's what I'm asking you. Like, what is the most manly, Like I've had students say before, lots of hair, I've had students, hairy or gruff or aggressive or, the kinds of words that you were sharing with me right there. Yeah, the brawny guy on the paper towels, that's this. Or that in the cartoon, the Beauty and the Beast cartoon. Beast. What's the guy's name? No, not the Beast, the other guy. Gaston. The Gaston guy. That would be here, right? He even sings about how every square inch of him is covered in hair, right?
Yeah.
So I think he was supposed to. But anyway, and then on the other side, the other opposite end of the spectrum, give me a couple. Dainty. There we go. That's very different from the strong and the gruff. What else? Submissive. Yes, there's a very insightful kind of. Give me another one. Fragile, dainty, submissive, maybe. Some of my students in the past have said sparkly. Or pink, but no, pink is assigned to this as a behavior that you're supposed to like. Okay, so is every female? I know what Coco's gonna say because I heard her. She was like ready for some fighting words right there. But if dainty and dainty and fragile and submissive, is every female dainty, fragile, and submissive?
No.
Hell no, right? We're not. Okay, but does that mean if I'm here as a female who's here, what does that mean? And what's the name of this? And is every guy, what did you even say? Strong and aggressive, Yeah, is every guy the brawny paper towel guy? No. Does that mean, does that mean you're not this? No. And does your age, let's overlap another more complicated thing, does your age affect your gender? If gender is about behaviors associated with your masculinity and femininity, can your age affect your gender category? Think about this. How old, first of all, tell me what sex am I talking about when I give you this? And how old is the person? A tomboy. Use the sex words. Girl is a gender word. Female or male are the sex words. Female is a tomboy, even though tom is a name for a male, and a boy is a gender category for a male individual. Because do boys have different behaviors associated with their condition in life than adult man does? Is there a difference between the behavioral expectations between a boy and a man? Yes. Since your answer is yes, then boy is a gender word, and man is a gender word. Girl is a gender word. Woman is a gender word. Male, female, intersex are sex words. Tomboy, you said goes with female sex category, but what behaviors would you assign to a tomboy? I mean, give me some specific ones. Do what? Sportsy?
Hunting.
Sportsy? Hunting? Climbing trees? Mud pies? What'd you say?
Not dainty.
Not dainty.
Yeah.
Not dainty. Right? Not dainty. So maybe somewhere here. Maybe. And I heard you say 12. And I heard somebody else say adolescent. So if a person is 40 and not dainty and is sportsy, Are they still a tomboy, or should we have a different gender word for that? Or do we have a different gender word for that? We get even more complicated at 40 because now we have to add the sexuality into it, right? All these other social factors. So are we talking about heterosexual, sportsy, not dainty? Are we talking about homosexual, sportsy, not dainty? There's different gender words that will mean those things to us, right? Lipstick lesbian, gender term, right? You can imagine the look of that person and some of the behaviors of that person. Behavioral aspects are about gender. And a culture has social facts and norms that are assigned to the sex characteristics where we get our gender categories from. What?
I'm trying to, because I can't stop thinking about sexuality.
Yes, I don't have, so
I don't know. It's not
I know I threw the sexuality thing in there, but it was to emphasize that age does, when you overlap age onto this, it does change things. Y'all know who,
About it way longer.
yeah.
A lot of people often kind of use, because you think based on like the behaviors of the gender,
Based on the,
it influences their sexuality.
it can, well, I mean, it can. We do make those assumptions, don't we? And that's where these things also come into social stratification, because we make assumptions based on what we think is the characteristic of the dominant group compared to the characteristic of somebody who's not dominant or a subordinate individual, submissive, to use Ian's word. Subordinate groups are assumed to be submissive to the dominant group who is in control and powerful. And quite often, it's not just about socioeconomic status, it's about race, ethnicity, sex, and gender. And then maybe sexuality also is in here, that can define who the dominant group is compared to who or groups are. There might be more than one in a society, and there are definitely more than one subordinate group in a society. Questions? You have a question, I can tell. No? Okay. What can I help with the processing? Y'all know who Arnold Schwarzenegger is? And he was the governor of California. He said, so he was the governor of California like when y'all were born, most of you. And people at that time in history were kind of against him because he's an actor, right? And so why does he need to be? And he was a foreign-born actor, so I was like, why do you need to be in politics? And so California is where he got the governorship, and California has always had bad problems with finances, and so I remember Arnold Schwarzenegger was being interviewed for something, and he had presented his economic plan to help California get out of their economic problems. And some reporter said, such and such economist from Harvard or something says your economic plan won't work, blah, blah, They were asking him a challenging question. He said, I say to those economists who don't believe my plan will work, stop being economic girly men, he said. A girly man. Where does that go on this spectrum, right? Definitely not the brawny guy over here. And that was used as a subordinating thing. You girly man as opposed to a manly man, like Tarzan, I guess, right? So, and how many of y'all have seen, what's the name of the movie? The baseball movie, the little kids, Sandlot. Have y'all seen the movie Sandlot? Like when the two neighborhood groups or whatever get together and they're hurling insults at each other. And what the insult that stops everything, and it's like going to be physical fight from now on, is one of them says to the next, "You throw like a girl." That was it. These things, we learn that these things matter, don't we? Just like with race and ethnicity, we learn in our socialization process that these things matter. And we rank each other and use as insults toward each other things that are defined as shameful or defined as inferior in our society, but they are social definitions. So it's important, in my opinion, for us to know what is socially defined, because are we part of society? Are we part of culture? So do we have some input here? And have things changed significantly in your lifetime or between your grandma's lifetime and now as far as attitudes with this stuff? What do y'all think? Do you have power to make a change? Maybe so. Okay, what time is it?
It's 10:30.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. So any questions or anything? I made y'all speechless. Y'all are not my speechless class. Y'all are my talkers. Okay. No questions?
I'm trying to soak it in.
I'm sorry?
Is this picture on 251 Little Rock?
Oh yeah, the school picture. I think it is. It doesn't say that though, does it? You'll have to look in the. I think that there's a bibliography section for our textbook, and at the very end it might cite if they reference that picture, it might give you more details about where it was. But if it's not Little Rock, it should be, right? That's one of our claims to fame, unfortunately. Poor racial relations in our past history. So, okay, so good class, thank you, and I will see you on Monday next week. Or I'll see you online, however that